Imagine this. You've just ended another relationship that left you drained, confused, and questioning your judgment. Friends saw the red flags from miles away, but you were convinced this person was different, special, the one who truly understood you. Now, as you sit in the aftermath wondering how you keep finding yourself in these situations, you're faced with a disturbing question that cuts deeper than you'd like to admit. What if you're not just unlucky in love? What if there's something inside you that actively seeks out these toxic connections? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychologist who delved deeper into the human psyche than perhaps anyone before him, discovered something unsettling about human attraction. He found that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with projections. We fall in love with parts of ourselves that we've buried so deep in our unconscious that we can only recognize them when we see them reflected in another person. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. The more toxic the person, the more likely they are to carry the very shadow aspects of ourselves that we desperately need to confront but refuse to acknowledge. This isn't about bad luck or poor judgment. This is about a psychological mechanism so deeply embedded in your unconscious mind that it operates like a heat-seeking missile, drawing you toward the very people who will trigger your deepest wounds and force you to face the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. Jung called this shadow projection, and it's the reason you keep attracting the same type of person in different packages. Think about your last toxic relationship. What qualities did this person possess that initially drew you to them? Their confidence when you felt insecure, their emotional intensity when you'd spent years suppressing your feelings, their rebellious nature when you'd always played it safe. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Those very qualities that attracted you exist within your own psyche, buried in what Jung termed your shadow, the repository of everything you've deemed unacceptable about yourself. But there's another layer to this psychological drama that Jung discovered, one that makes toxic attraction even more insidious. He identified two powerful archetypes within every person's unconscious, the Anima in men and the Animus in women. These represent the idealized image of the opposite sex that exists in your psyche, shaped by your earliest relationships and cultural conditioning. When you meet someone who embodies your Anima or Animus projection, the attraction feels almost mystical. They seem like your soulmate, your other half, the person who completes you. This is exactly how toxic people slip past your defenses. They intuitively mirror back your own Anima or Animus projection, creating an instant sense of recognition and belonging. The most manipulative individuals are often unconsciously skilled at reading these projections and reflecting them back to you. They become whoever you need them to be, not because they're consciously deceptive, but because they're operating from their own wounded unconscious, desperately seeking the very validation and completion they're promising to give you. It's a psychological dance between two incomplete people, each using the other as a mirror for their disowned parts. This explains why toxic relationships often feel more intense and meaningful than healthy ones. You're not just attracted to the person, you're attracted to the possibility of reclaiming lost parts of yourself through them. You're unconsciously hoping that by possessing this person, you'll somehow integrate the shadow qualities they represent without having to do the difficult inner work of owning them yourself. The tragic irony is that this very mechanism, designed by your psyche to help you become whole, becomes the very thing that keeps you trapped in cycles of dysfunction. Instead of integration, you get projection. Instead of growth, you get addiction. Instead of wholeness, you get dependency on external sources to feel complete. Before we dive deeper into this psychological labyrinth, take a moment to engage with this content. If this exploration of your unconscious patterns is resonating with you, hit the subscribe button and give this video a like. Understanding these hidden mechanisms of attraction could be the key to finally breaking free from the toxic cycles that have kept you trapped. The problem runs much deeper than simple poor judgment or bad luck. What Jung discovered through decades of analytical work is that toxic attraction is fundamentally a problem of psychological projection, a defense mechanism so sophisticated that it operates entirely beneath the threshold of consciousness. Your psyche is constantly scanning your environment, not for healthy partners, but for individuals who carry the energetic signature of your disowned shadow material. This shadow formation begins in early childhood through what Jung called the persona development process. As children, we learn which aspects of our natural personality are acceptable to our caregivers and which must be suppressed to maintain love and approval. The rejected aspects don't disappear, they're banished to the unconscious where they form the shadow. These might include natural aggression, authentic emotional expression, healthy boundaries, or even positive qualities like confidence and self-worth if they were discouraged in your family system. Here's where the roots of toxic attraction are. Planted, your psyche maintains an unconscious registry of all these disowned qualities. When you encounter someone who boldly expresses what you've learned to suppress, you experience what Jung called shadow fascination. This isn't conscious attraction. It's an unconscious magnetic pull towards someone who represents your unlived life. The narcissist's grandiosity attracts those who've suppressed their healthy self-esteem. The emotionally volatile person magnetizes those who've learned to over-control their feelings. The commitment-phobic individual draws in those who've never learned to honor their own autonomy. Jung's concept of complexes provides another crucial piece of this puzzle. Complexes are autonomous clusters of psychic energy that form around emotionally charged experiences, often from childhood. These complexes act like separate personalities within your psyche, each with their own agenda and each capable of being triggered by specific external stimuli. When you meet someone who activates one of your core complexes, perhaps an abandonment complex or a worthiness complex, you don't experience a rational choice about whether to pursue this person. Instead, you experience what feels like destiny, fate, or finally finding the one. The Anima and Animus projections that Jung identified add another layer of complication to toxic attraction. These archetypal images of the idealized opposite sex are formed through your earliest relationships with parents and are heavily influenced by cultural conditioning. When someone embodies your Anima or Animus projection, the attraction bypasses your rational mind entirely. This is why you might find yourself drawn to the dangerous bad boy or the mysterious, emotionally unavailable woman, despite consciously knowing these patterns are harmful. What makes this particularly insidious is that truly toxic individuals often have highly developed unconscious radar for detecting and mirroring these projections. They're skilled at becoming whatever your wounded psyche is seeking, not through conscious manipulation, but through their own desperate need for validation and control. This creates what Jung called a participation mystique, a psychological merger, where boundaries dissolve and you begin to lose touch with where you end and the other person begins. The cultural conditioning around romantic love makes this psychological vulnerability even more dangerous. We're taught to believe that intense attraction, the feeling of finally finding someone who gets me, and the sense that someone completes us are signs of true love. In reality, these are often signs of psychological possession by archetypal energies. Healthy love develops gradually as you get to know someone's authentic character. Toxic attraction feels immediate and overwhelming because it's based on projection rather than genuine connection. Jung also identified how trauma compounds this pattern. When you've experienced early relational trauma, your nervous system becomes wired to equate intensity with intimacy. The familiar emotional chaos of a toxic relationship activates the same neural pathways that were formed in childhood, creating a physiological sense of home, even when the relationship is objectively harmful. Your body betrays your mind, convincing you that this familiar dysfunction is actually love. The shadow also carries what Jung called compensatory function. If you've developed an overly adaptable, people-pleasing persona, your shadow will contain healthy aggression and boundary-setting capacity. You'll find yourself mysteriously attracted to people who express these qualities, unconsciously hoping to access these disowned parts of yourself through the relationship. This is why gentle, caring people often find themselves drawn to selfish, demanding partners. They're unconsciously seeking balance through external means. This psychological setup ensures that your relationships become battlegrounds where your conscious values clash with your unconscious needs, creating the perfect conditions for toxic dynamics to flourish. The hidden consequences of shadow projection in relationships extend far beyond the obvious pain of toxic connections. Jung discovered that when we consistently project our disowned qualities onto others, we create what he called psychological parasitism, a state where our sense of wholeness becomes dependent on external sources. This dependency doesn't just affect your romantic relationships. It fundamentally alters your relationship with reality itself. One of the most devastating consequences is the gradual erosion of your authentic self. When you're constantly seeking completion through another person, you stop developing the very qualities you're projecting. If you're attracted to confident people because you've disowned your own confidence, you never develop genuine self-assurance. Instead, you become addicted to being around confident people, creating a cycle where your self-worth fluctuates based on your proximity to others who embody your disowned qualities. You become a psychological vampire, unconsciously feeding off others' energy to feel complete. This dynamic creates what Jung identified as Anima Animus possession, a state where you become so identified with seeking your projected ideal that you lose touch with your own authentic desires and needs. Women possessed by animus projections might find themselves constantly seeking the approval of authoritative men, sacrificing their own inner wisdom to external masculine validation. Men caught in anima possession become dependent on women to feel emotionally alive, unable to access their own emotional depths without a feminine presence to activate them. The neurological consequences are equally profound. Modern neuroscience has confirmed Jung's insights about projection by showing how trauma and conditioning create neural pathways that literally rewire your brain to seek familiar patterns, even when they're harmful. Your nervous system becomes calibrated to the emotional frequency of dysfunction, making healthy relationships feel boring or wrong at a physiological level. This is why people often sabotage good relationships. Their nervous system interprets emotional stability as abandonment because it's so different from their familiar pattern of chaos and intensity. Perhaps most insidiously, shadow projection creates what Jung called projection contamination, where your ability to see others clearly becomes permanently impaired. You stop relating to people as they actually are, and instead relate only to your projections onto them. This creates a hall of mirrors, where every relationship becomes a reflection of your own unconscious material, rather than a genuine encounter with another human being. You lose the capacity for authentic intimacy because you're never truly meeting another person. You're only meeting your own projections. The social consequences ripple outward in disturbing ways. Societies filled with individuals operating from shadow projection create collective toxicity, political polarization, cultural conflicts, and social media outrage cycles all stem from mass projection of collective shadows onto perceived enemies. When you haven't learned to own your darkness, you must find it in others to feel psychologically balanced. This creates the us versus them mentality that drives everything from relationship conflicts to global wars. On a personal level, chronic shadow projection leads to what Jung termed inflation and deflation cycles. When you're in relationship with someone carrying your positive projections, you feel grandiose and special. After all, if this amazing person loves you, you must be amazing too. But when the relationship ends or the projection breaks down, you crash into devastating deflation, feeling worthless and unlovable. Your self-worth becomes completely dependent on maintaining these projections, creating an exhausting emotional roller coaster. The financial and practical consequences are often overlooked but equally destructive. People caught in toxic attraction patterns often sacrifice careers, friendships, financial stability, and life goals to maintain access to their projected completeness. They relocate for relationships, change their values to match their partners, and abandon their authentic path because their sense of wholeness has become externalized. The cost isn't just emotional, it's the cost of an unlived life. Jung also identified how shadow projection perpetuates intergenerational trauma. Children growing up in households where parents are operating from projection rather than authentic relationship learn that love is conditional, chaotic, and based on meeting unconscious needs rather than genuine care. They internalize these patterns and inevitably recreate them in their own relationships, passing the dysfunction down to the next generation. The family shadow becomes a hereditary curse that shapes romantic choices for generations. Perhaps most tragically, shadow projection robs you of the very growth it was designed to facilitate. The psyche creates attraction to help you reclaim disowned parts of yourself, but when you remain unconscious of the process, you never actually integrate anything. Instead, you become addicted to the projection itself, trapped in an endless cycle of seeking externally what can only be found within. You mistake the menu for the meal, the map for the territory, the reflection for the reality. Breaking free from the prison of shadow projection requires what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to feel the discomfort of owning your disowned parts rather than seeking them in others. This isn't about positive thinking or behavioral modification. It's about fundamentally altering your relationship with your unconscious material. The path to freedom is counterintuitive and requires embracing everything you've been taught to avoid. The first radical step is learning to recognize projection in real time. Jung developed a simple but powerful technique. Pay attention to your emotional reactions to others, especially strong attractions or repulsions. Anything that triggers an intense emotional response is likely pointing to projected material. When you find yourself thinking, "I could never be like that," or "I wish I could be more like them," you're identifying shadow projections. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to how much of your own energy you've invested in disowning that particular quality. Active imagination, Jung's revolutionary technique for engaging directly with unconscious content, offers a pathway to reclaim these projections. Instead of seeking the confident person to feel confident, you dialogue with your own inner confidence. You imagine conversations with the parts of yourself you've rejected, treating them as autonomous entities, worthy of respect rather than aspects to be eliminated. This requires courage because you'll discover that your shadow contains not just negative qualities but also your greatest strengths and creative potentials. The process of Anima-Animus integration demands even more radical honesty. You must acknowledge that your idealized image of the perfect partner is actually a map of your own unlived potentials. Men must develop relationship to their own anima, their capacity for receptivity, intuition, and emotional depth. Women must integrate their animus, their capacity for assertion, independent thinking, and authentic power. This doesn't mean abandoning your authentic gender expression. It means becoming psychologically whole rather than half a person seeking completion through another. Jung emphasized that this work cannot be done through willpower alone. It requires what he called religious attitude, a recognition that you're dealing with forces larger than your conscious ego. You must develop respect for the autonomy of your unconscious and learn to collaborate with it rather than trying to control it. This might involve therapy, meditation, dream work, or other practices that create dialogue between conscious and unconscious material. One of the most challenging aspects of this liberation is learning to tolerate the anxiety of incompleteness. Your projections serve a defensive function. They help you avoid feeling your own emptiness, inadequacy, or wounded places. When you withdraw projections, you temporarily feel more alone and incomplete than before. This is actually progress, because you're finally feeling your authentic emotional reality rather than the artificial completion that comes from projection. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, a necessary passage through psychological death before rebirth into wholeness. The work also requires developing what Jung termed differentiation, the ability to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to others. This means stopping the unconscious practice of taking on others' emotions, problems, and responsibilities, while also stopping the projection of your own material onto them. You learn to hold appropriate boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection. Perhaps most importantly, you must grieve the loss of your projections. That idealized anima or animus figure was never real, but losing the fantasy feels like losing a part of yourself. You must mourn the death of the magical thinking that someone else could complete you, make you whole, or solve your fundamental existential challenges. This grieving process is essential because it clears psychological space for authentic relationship. first with yourself, then with others. The ultimate rebellion is choosing consciousness over comfort, growth over safety, and authentic relationship over projected fantasy. It's the decision to become a whole person rather than spending your life seeking completion through others. The most profound realization Jung offered about toxic attraction is this: every person you've ever been drawn to carries a piece of your soul that you gave away long ago. The toxic relationships that have caused you the most pain have also been your psyche's desperate attempts to become whole. Your unconscious mind has been orchestrating these encounters not to punish you, but to present you with opportunities to reclaim the lost parts of yourself that were buried in childhood. This means that every narcissist you've attracted carries your disowned grandiosity. The healthy self-love you learned was selfish. Every emotionally unavailable person reflects your own fear of vulnerability and intimacy. Every controlling partner embodies the personal power you were taught to suppress. Your psyche has been using these relationships as mirrors, desperately, trying to show you what needs to be integrated within yourself. The revolutionary understanding that emerges from Jung's work is that healing toxic attraction patterns isn't about finding better people to attract. It's about becoming complete within yourself so that you no longer need others to carry parts of your psyche. When you integrate your shadow, you stop being magnetically drawn to people who express your disowned darkness. When you develop relationship with your own anima or animus, you stop seeking idealized partners who embody your projected completeness. This integration creates what Jung called psychological sovereignty, a state where your sense of wholeness comes from internal integration rather than external relationships. From this place, you naturally attract and are attracted to other whole people because you're no longer operating from unconscious need and projection. Relationships become collaborative adventures between two complete individuals rather than desperate mergers between two psychological fragments seeking wholeness. The paradox Jung discovered is that only when you stop needing others to complete, do you become capable of genuine love. Projection-based attraction feels like love, but is actually psychological vampirism. You're unconsciously feeding off others to maintain your sense of self. True love emerges when you can see and appreciate another person for who they actually are rather than for how they serve your unconscious projections and needs. This doesn't mean you'll no longer feel attraction or that relationships become boring. Instead, you develop what Jung called conscious love, attraction based on genuine appreciation for another's authentic qualities rather than their ability to carry your projections. This type of love is actually more passionate and sustainable because it's based on reality rather than fantasy. The ultimate truth about toxic attraction is that it's been serving a sacred purpose, forcing you to confront and integrate the rejected aspects of your psyche. Every painful relationship has been the initiation, every heartbreak an opportunity for psychological birth. The question isn't why you keep attracting toxic people. The question is whether you're willing to receive the gifts these encounters have been trying to give you. Jung's most radical insight was that individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, often requires us to encounter our own toxicity reflected in others before we can own and transform it within ourselves. The people who trigger you most are often your greatest teachers, not because they're wise or conscious, but because they're unconsciously showing you exactly what needs to be healed within your own psyche. When you finally understand that every relationship has been preparing you for the ultimate relationship, the one with your own complete self, everything changes. You stop being a victim of unconscious attraction patterns and become a conscious participant in your own psychological evolution. You realize that the journey toward wholeness that began with those painful, toxic relationships was always leading you home to yourself. The greatest love story isn't finding your soulmate, it's becoming soul whole within yourself. From that wholeness, all your relationships become expressions of love rather than desperate attempts to find it. This is Jung's ultimate gift, the recognition that what you've been seeking in others has been waiting within you all along. If you're ready to dive deeper into this psychological exploration, engage with this content by liking this video and subscribing. Your journey toward conscious love and authentic wholeness is the most important work you'll ever do.